I was sitting in a clinic in Washington, D.C., surrounded by the sound of numbers being called, the sharp scent of medical alcohol hanging in the air, and the harsh, white lights that made everything feel even colder. At 73, I, Dorothy Matthews, had thought the biggest upheavals of my life were already behind me. But then my phone rang. Mom. My daughter Victoria's voice was as cold as a blade. Tomorrow I'm leaving for Europe. I've sold the beach house in Chesapeake Bay and Dad's truck. We need the money. Philip has a wonderful investment opportunity in London. Goodbye. I froze, my hands trembling as they gripped the phone. 45 years of raising, sacrificing, loving. And now, Victoria treated me as if I were nothing more than something disposable. Yet instead of bursting into tears, the corner of my mouth curved into a thin smile. Because there was one thing my daughter knew nothing about. 3 days before James, my husband, died of a heart attack, he had handed me a thick manila envelope. "Dorothy," he said softly, "I've put this in the drawer of your wardrobe. If anything happens to me, open it, but only when you're truly ready." Victoria thought she had taken everything from me, but the truth was, James had prepared a secret no one expected, and now my daughter was about to learn a lesson, one she would never forget. If you want to know what happened after that fateful call, hit subscribe to the Revenge Tales channel so you won't miss the upcoming episodes. And I have only one question for you. If you were me, would you forgive Victoria or make her pay the price to the end? I was back home with a very strange feeling. Not the sadness that had hung over me for months, but a rare sensation, a feeling of being in control. For the first time since James died, I felt I had the upper hand. James, my husband, passed away 6 months ago. His death came so suddenly. That morning, he was still making coffee for me as usual, still leaning down to kiss my forehead and say, "Good morning, my love." Those were the last words I heard from him. A few minutes later, James slumped over right at the dining table from a severe heart attack. After 45 years together, he left without a goodbye. Since then, Victoria had been visiting me more often. 3 times a week, she came with me to shop, helped with the funeral arrangements, and advised me to get regular health checkups. "Mom, you must take better care of yourself now that you're alone," Victoria said, offering a smile that at the time I naively mistook for affection. Looking back now, I understand. It was not affection, but self-interest. The beach house on Chesapeake Bay. It used to be our little paradise. James and I bought it when Victoria was 15, with sweat and tears. Every summer the family would go there. Victoria would bring her boyfriend, later Philip, to stay. I cooked, did the laundry, cleaned. That house was tradition, memory, the heart of our family. I never imagined my daughter would treat it like a commodity to be exchanged for money. And that old Ford truck, James loved it like a child. Every Sunday he would carefully wash it, change the oil on schedule, always park it in the same spot under the tree in front of the house. His familiar scent still lingered on the seats. Victoria knew how much it meant to me, yet she sold it without a second thought. That evening I sat in the familiar kitchen, my eyes fixed on the wardrobe drawer, where I had kept the envelope James left. Over the past 6 months, amid the pain of loss and hundreds of funeral arrangements, I had nearly forgotten it existed. With trembling hands, I pulled the drawer open. The thick manila envelope lay there, my name written in James's familiar handwriting. I carried it back to the bedroom, sat on the bed I had shared all my life, and took a deep breath. Dusk had fallen. Darkness spread through the house. But this time, it did not frighten me. I opened the envelope slowly, as if unwrapping a birthday gift. Inside were stacks of legal papers, property deeds, bank certificates, and a handwritten letter. Tears streamed down my face the moment I saw James's handwriting. My beloved Dorothy, If you are reading these lines, it means I am no longer here. I'm sorry I did not tell you everything while I was alive, but I did not want to worry you. Over the years, I have put our savings into real estate and businesses. We do not only own the beach house, Dorothy. We own 6 other properties, including the apartment building where Victoria and Philip live. We also hold shares in 3 companies, worth more than you might imagine. You are wealthy now, Dorothy. You have always been wealthy, and now it is documented on paper. I turned each page, my eyes blurred with tears. Certificates of ownership for multiple homes in different neighborhoods, a luxury condominium right in the heart of Washington, D.C., a small seaside hotel, and, just as James had written, the 20-story apartment building where Victoria and Philip live was also our property. James had been quietly in control for the past 10 years through a company whose name I had never heard. According to the records, I was the sole heir. There were also bank statements with numbers so large I had to rub my eyes and look again. James, who had driven a bus for 40 years, turned out to be an outstanding investor. Every penny we saved, every sacrifice we made, he had quietly multiplied. In the letter, James explained that he had kept this secret because he did not want to cause me additional worry, and especially because he did not want Victoria to know. You understand too, Dorothy, our daughter. If she knew her parents had such wealth, she would change. I only wanted her to love us for who we are, not for what we have. How ironic. Victoria had abandoned me, believing we had nothing left. The truth was, we had everything. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. I walked through the house, gently touching the old things Victoria had once scorned as outdated. I looked at the family photographs on the wall, particularly the picture of 5-year-old Victoria sitting on James's knee, giggling. Where had that sweet child gone? And when did she become so cold and calculating? I could not have imagined that it would not be long before Victoria would be forced to face the consequences of her own choices. And I, the mother she thought had nothing left, would be the one to decide my daughter's fate. I read the last lines of the letter again. You have always been wealthy, Dorothy. Now it is up to you to decide when your daughter will understand this truth. Tears still ran down my cheeks, but they were no longer from sorrow. For the first time since James's death, I felt I had regained control of my life. If you want to know how Dorothy will use this secret fortune to teach her daughter a lesson she will never forget, subscribe to the Revenge Tales channel right now. And I ask you this: if you discovered a loved one had betrayed you, would you forgive them immediately or wait until they had a taste of suffering first? The next morning, as I sat sipping my coffee, my head still spinning from what I had discovered in James's envelope, the phone rang again. This time, Victoria's voice sounded gentler. But after all these years, I had learned one thing: never trust sudden changes from my daughter. "Mom, are you well?" Her voice came, trying to add a note of concern. "I wanted to talk more about yesterday. I know it was a bit sudden." "Go on," I answered, keeping my tone perfectly calm. "Mom, Philip, and I have discussed it thoroughly. We left 30% of the sale proceeds from the house and the truck for you. The money has been transferred into your account. It's not much, but it's enough for you to live on for a few months while you find a smaller place. 30%. Assets that rightfully belong to me, now presented as a generous favor." "I understand, Victoria." "Philip has an excellent investment opportunity in Europe, Mom. If it succeeds, we'll make a lot of money. When we return, I'll help you find a nice little apartment suitable for your circumstances." Suitable for your circumstances. She spoke as if she knew what my circumstances were. "How long are you leaving for?" I asked. "At least 6 months. Maybe longer if business goes well, but don't worry. When we come back, I'll take better care of you." I was silent, my hand still gripping the phone. 2 short minutes, but Victoria's words were like a cold blade, severing the motherly bond. What hurt me wasn't the money, but the truth. My daughter had so easily erased me from her life with a single phone call. After hanging up, I logged into my bank account. Just as she said, the money had been transferred, a sum that, in their eyes, was generous, but to me was an insult. The beach house had been sold off cheaply, and James's truck sold too. All those sacred memories reduced to meaningless numbers. I wondered, when did Victoria learn to speak like a stranger from a bank instead of my daughter? The phrases, small apartment, suitable for your circumstances, echoed as if I were merely a burden to be arranged. And looking back, I realized the smiles, the grocery trips, the rides to the hospital, it had all been preparation for today's move. The child James and I raised was gone. She had become someone else, cold, calculating, and unfamiliar. That afternoon, from the window, I watched Victoria and Philip load their things into a taxi. Philip carried 2 large suitcases. Victoria hugged an expensive handbag. They laughed and kissed, excited like children about to embark on an adventure. Not once did they glance toward my window, not a word of farewell. When the taxi disappeared from sight, I sat in the kitchen beside a cup of tea and the stack of documents James left. I knew I had to make a decision. I could call Jonathan, the lawyer, and immediately demand the assets back. But another thought surfaced. Perhaps there was a better way. An educational way to make Victoria truly understand the value of what she had discarded. I called Helen, my neighbor of 40 years. She brought over a tin of homemade cookies as usual. "Dorothy, your daughter left already?" Helen asked, eyes full of sympathy. "Yes," I nodded. "They've gone to Europe on business." Helen studied me. "You seem different. Not as sad as I expected." "I'm fine, Helen." Helen set the tin on the table, her voice dropping. "Dorothy, can I be honest? The way Victoria's been treating you these past months, something feels off to me. Especially that Philip." I frowned slightly. Helen had warned me about him before. "You heard something?" I asked. "The neighbors say they often hear arguments from their apartment. And some people have seen Philip with a young woman several times. Always flashy, expensive cars." I was silent, my heart twinging but not surprised. Philip had never been someone I trusted. "There's more." Helen hesitated. "People are saying Philip is heavily in debt. He borrows from many banks, using the apartment as collateral, but that apartment doesn't seem to be under his name." I let out a bitter laugh. Helen didn't know. The true owner of that apartment was me. "Dorothy." Helen took my hand and whispered, "I have a feeling Victoria will have to pay for this decision. People like Philip, they only stay when there's money." That night, I tossed and turned. Victoria had chosen to sacrifice her relationship with her mother to chase after a man she didn't truly understand, a dreamy European fantasy in exchange for family, memories, and love. I looked out the window at the pale streetlights cutting through the night. Somewhere across the ocean, my daughter was beginning the journey she believed would bring happiness and wealth. But she did not know. That path was leading straight into a trap of her own making. If you want to find out which route Dorothy will choose to confront her daughter's betrayal, subscribe to the Revenge Tales channel to follow the story. And I want to ask you, in this situation, would you immediately move to reclaim everything or quietly wait for your child to taste the consequences first? The next morning, I put on my most formal black dress, the very one I had worn at James's funeral, and went to the office of attorney Jonathan Peterson in the city center. Jonathan had been our family's lawyer for more than 15 years, the one who helped us draft wills and handle all legal procedures. "Mrs. Matthews, it's so good to see you again." Jonathan rose to greet me, his smile warm and courteous. "You look healthier than the last time we met." "I need your help, Jonathan." I placed the leather case on the table. "I found these documents." Please review them and tell me the truth." Jonathan opened the case, leafing through the stacks of papers. At first, his face showed mild curiosity, then surprise, and finally, astonishment. "Mrs. Matthews, this is far more than I imagined. Mr. James truly was an exceptional man. According to these records, you are the owner of—" "I've read through it," I cut him off. "What I need to know is, are all of these legitimate? And what can I do with them?" Jonathan nodded, explaining that everything was valid. All the assets, shares, properties legally belonged to me. He confirmed what I had already suspected. Victoria's sale of the beach house was completely unlawful. "We can reclaim it immediately, Mrs. Matthews," Jonathan said firmly. "We could even sue Victoria for fraud." "No." My voice was decisive, and he paused in surprise. "But you have the right." "I know I have the right. But I don't want to destroy my daughter. I want to handle this another way, a way that will force her to learn." Jonathan looked at me, his eyes both puzzled and intrigued. "Then what would you like me to do?" "I want you to quietly reclaim the beach house and help me secure direct control over all the assets, especially the building where Victoria and Philip are living. But no one must know I'm behind it." Jonathan nodded. "It will take a few weeks, but it's possible." From that day on, I began living a double life. To my neighbors, I was still the pitiful widow abandoned by her daughter. But in the shadows, I was a wealthy woman, orchestrating the entire legacy James had left. Some evenings, sitting before the mirror, I saw myself as two people. One Dorothy, weak and pitiable in the eyes of others, and another Dorothy, quiet, decisive, even a little cold. That contrast sent a shiver through me, and strangely, a thrill. I realized I was no longer just a victim. I had become the one rewriting the game. I chose to remain in this house instead of moving as Victoria surely expected. Each morning I ate breakfast alone at the table where James once sat across from me. I strolled the neighborhood, nodding at the butcher, the grocer's wife. Everyone looked at me with the same mix of pity and curiosity, the look I had grown used to since James's funeral. One afternoon, Helen came over as she saw me watering the plants. "Dorothy, your daughter's gone to Europe, hasn't she?" "That's right. Victoria and Philip said they had business plans." "How will you manage, dear?" "Everyone knows James didn't leave much money." I only smiled. If only she knew the truth. "Don't worry, Helen, I'm fine. If you need anything, just tell me. I can help with shopping, bring food over." "Thank you, but really, I'm fine." Helen gave me that familiar look, pity mixed with slight relief that such a tragedy hadn't befallen her own family. Day after day, similar conversations repeated. I nodded, I smiled, letting them think I was a poor, unfortunate woman. But inside, I laughed quietly. I was playing a game of chess, and they had no idea. One Wednesday morning, Jonathan called. "I have good news. The sale of the beach house has been annulled. The buyer didn't know it was illegal, so they were refunded. The house is back in your hands. Thank you, Jonathan." As for the building where Victoria lives, the procedure is more complex. On paper, you're already the owner, but we need additional administrative steps to give you direct control. About 2 more weeks. Perfect, keep going after the call. I sat silently in the kitchen, staring at the pile of documents James had left. Victoria had been gone to Europe for 3 weeks. Not a single message, not a single call. To her, I had ceased to exist the moment she had the money she wanted. But I knew soon that would change. I decided to revisit the beach house. I took the familiar bus route James and I had traveled hundreds of times. The house appeared painted cream, its porch facing the ocean. I sat by the roadside staring at it for an hour, memories flooding back. Little Victoria building sandcastles, James grilling fish on the porch, me preparing salad in the kitchen, Later, Victoria bringing boyfriends, bringing Philip. All of it she had reduced to a cold transaction. An elderly man stepped out of the house, curious. "Are you all right, ma'am?" "I'm just reminiscing. I knew the previous owners." What a shame. They said the old lady was gravely ill, so they had to sell quickly. We thought it was an opportunity, but it turned out to be illegal. We had to return the house. I froze. Victoria had fabricated my illness to justify the sale. To her, I wasn't even a person, just an excuse. That evening, I sat in my room, whispering into the darkness. "We did it, James. Our daughter will come to understand the true value of family." And for the first time, I felt as if James answered, "I always knew you could. You and our daughter are stronger than you think." The first step was complete. Now it was only a matter of time to see how ready Victoria was to learn this lesson. While I was quietly reclaiming control of the assets in Washington, D.C., across the ocean, Victoria's life was collapsing in ways she never could have imagined. In the first few weeks, everything looked glamorous. They stayed in a luxury hotel in the heart of London. Victoria even posted photos on social media. She and Philip beaming in front of Big Ben, dining in upscale restaurants, shopping on Oxford Street. Everything seemed perfect. Then the phone calls started, first from the bank. Philip had taken out loans, using the apartment as collateral. But when they checked, the truth surfaced. Philip was not the owner. Those loans instantly became a problem. Philip was bombarded with debt collection calls. "Victoria, don't worry," Philip said, hurriedly hanging up. "It's just some paperwork issues. I'll handle it." But things were not fine as he claimed. The so-called investment opportunity didn't exist. The business partners he had promised were nothing but empty names. The money from selling the beach house and James's truck, funds Victoria thought would cover months of comfort, vanished faster than she expected. Philip's reckless habits devoured it. Gambling, expensive liquor, and lavish gifts for other women. Helen had been right all along. Victoria discovered the truth in the second month. One afternoon, she stumbled upon messages on Philip's phone. Sweet words to a young woman named Sophia. In them, Philip promised to buy her a diamond ring. "Philip, who is this woman?" Victoria confronted him inside the cramped hotel room they had moved into after they could no longer afford the luxury suite. "What are you thinking? She's just a business partner. A partner you call my love and promise a diamond ring?" Philip looked at her with cold, distant eyes. "Victoria, you're imagining things." But she was not imagining anymore. The pieces fit together. Philip had planned it all, exploiting her family's money to bankroll his wild lifestyle in Europe while maintaining an affair with another woman. The biggest fight erupted one rainy night in Paris. Philip claimed he had a last chance with a French company. Suspicious, Victoria followed him. Instead of meeting business partners, Philip walked into a cafe in Montmartre, where Sophia was waiting. Victoria couldn't hold back. She stormed in and confronted him right there. 2 years, she shouted, tears streaming down her face. 2 years I sacrificed everything for you. I left my mother, sold the house, sold the truck, and you only deceived me? Philip didn't bother to deny it. He looked at her as if she were an annoying stranger. "Victoria, we're finished. You've known it for a long time. Now accept it. Sophia and I are staying in Europe. You take care of yourself." That night, Victoria returned to the tiny hotel room. She sat by the window, staring at the sparkling Parisian lights. In her hands were less than 500 euros, a suitcase of clothes, and a return ticket she had booked just in case. For the first time since leaving Washington, D.C., Victoria thought of me, the mother she had abandoned with a single cold phone call. While Victoria curled up in glittering Paris, I was in Jonathan's office in Washington, D.C., signing the final papers to complete the reclamation of all the assets. 2 contrasting scenes, a woman who thought she had everything but lost it all, and a mother who thought she had lost everything but was quietly regaining it piece by piece. Life, I realized, can sometimes be brutally fair. "Mrs. Matthews," Jonathan said, "everything is finalized. You now have full control of all assets, and I've also arranged for James's truck to be returned. The buyer agreed in exchange for a small settlement." "Excellent, Jonathan. But now I need you to do one more thing." "What is it?" "I want you to send a letter to my daughter." "A letter?" "An eviction notice. She is to vacate the apartment the moment she sets foot back in America." Jonathan was silent for a long moment. "Mrs. Matthews, are you certain?" "I'm certain. Victoria chose to treat me as if I were invisible. Now she will learn that I am more present than ever." That afternoon, Helen came by, full of neighborhood gossip. "Dorothy, have you heard? Philip is in trouble with the bank. They say he used the apartment as collateral for loans, but it's not even his. Victoria doesn't know, and she'll likely have to come back to the States to sort it out." I nodded lightly. "How complicated?" "And another thing," Helen lowered her voice, "that so-called work in Europe." "Nothing at all. Philip was just running from his debts perfect. Everything was unfolding exactly as I had foreseen. Victoria had chosen to trust a liar over her own mother. Now the truth would make her pay." That night I sat on the porch, a steaming cup of tea in my hands, gazing up at the starry sky. James used to say the stars were the souls of those who had lived a full life, watching over their families from above. "If that's true," I whispered, "then you must be up there, James, watching this plan unfold exactly as you intended. Thank you. Even in death, you're still protecting me." Victoria was coming home, and only then would the real game begin. Victoria returned to Washington, D.C. on a Tuesday evening at the end of April. I knew this because Helen, who seemed to have an entire neighborhood network of information, knocked on my door the very next morning. "Dorothy, your daughter came back last night," Helen said, placing a bag of cookies on the table. "I saw her enter the building with just one suitcase. She looked awful, pale, dark circles under her eyes, like she cried the whole flight." "Alone?" I asked. "Completely alone. And something odd, too. When the doorman asked for her keys, she didn't have them. She had to ask the manager to open the door with a spare. That meant Philip had kept the keys. Perhaps he had decided not to return, or Victoria had discovered something and fled in a hurry. That afternoon, Jonathan called me. "Mrs. Matthews, the letter was delivered an hour ago. The doorman confirmed your daughter received it in person." "Perfect. How long do we give her?" 30 days to vacate the apartment, as required by law." That night I didn't sleep. I lay there imagining Victoria's face when she read the letter, first confusion, then disbelief, then panic. She would think it was a mistake, but when she called to check, she would find everything was perfectly legal. The next morning, as if on cue, the phone rang at 8. It was Victoria, her voice desperate. Mom, I need to talk to you. It's urgent." "Good morning, sweetheart. How was Europe?" "Mom, I don't have time for that." "Yesterday, I got a very strange letter. It says I have to vacate the apartment in 30 days. That has to be a mistake, right? Do you know anything about this? An eviction notice. How strange." "Who sent it?" I asked. "From some company I've never heard of." "Let me check. Robert Investments Incorporated. Do you know them?" James had named the company after himself. Poetic, really. "No, sweetheart, I've never heard of them. Mom, I need your help. I don't know what to do. Philip left me in Europe, ran off with another woman, and now I come back to this. I don't understand what's happening." So it was clear. Philip had abandoned her. Maybe when the money ran out, or when he realized the legal trouble at home was worse than he thought. My poor girl. Where are you now? I'm at the apartment, but I don't know for how long. Mom, can I come see you? I need someone to talk to. I don't have anyone else. Irony. Only after being abandoned by the man she chose over me did Victoria remember she still had a mother. Of course, sweetheart. Come anytime. I'm coming right now. She arrived an hour later. When I opened the door, I froze at the sight of her. Thinner, dark shadows under her eyes, expensive clothes now wrinkled and unkempt, her eyes red and swollen. Mom, she whispered. For a moment, I thought she might hug me, but she stopped short as if suddenly remembering how we had ended things. Come in, sweetheart. Coffee? Yes, thank you. We sat in the kitchen, at the very table where weeks before I had read James's documents. Victoria looked small in that chair, lost, just as she had been as a child telling me stories about school. Mom, I'm sorry for the way I left. I know I didn't treat you well. That's in the past, sweetheart. No, it's not. I said horrible things, and now... Her voice broke. Now I have no one. What happened with Philip? I asked. He left me for a 25-year-old waitress in Paris. There was no business deal at all. It was all lies. He just wanted to run from his debts and use the money from selling your house for his adventure. All those debts? Yes, a lot. He'd been borrowing for years, using the apartment as collateral, but now I've learned he was never the owner. This was my chance. You didn't know, sweetheart. Property matters are complicated. The problem is the banks are chasing me for his debts. They say as his wife, I'm also responsible. And now this eviction notice. Mom, I don't know what to do. I have no money, no job, no place to live. She began to cry, real tears of despair. The mother's heart in me softened for a moment. I wanted to hold her, to soothe her, to say everything would be all right. Then I remembered her voice at the clinic that day, cold as steel, the ease with which she discarded me, speaking as if I were nothing but a burden. Have you spoken to a lawyer about the letter? I don't have money for a lawyer. We spent everything in Europe. Philip took the rest when he left with her. So what do you plan to do? I don't know. Maybe I can stay with you for a while until I find a job and rent a small place. This was the question I had waited for. After driving me out of my own home, selling my belongings, treating me like garbage, now she wanted me to save her. She wanted the poor widow she had invented to rescue her from the consequences she had created. Of course, sweetheart. This will always be your home. Victoria looked at me, shocked that it was so simple. Really, Mom? After everything? You're my daughter, Victoria. That never changes, she stood, and this time she did hug me. It was the desperate embrace of a drowning woman clinging to the last thing left. I hugged her back, but it was no longer unconditional. In my arms now lay calculation, strategy. Thank you, Mom. I promise I'll find a job soon. I won't be a burden. Don't worry about that now. Rest. Then we'll see what your options are. That afternoon, Victoria returned to the apartment to collect a few things. I stayed in the kitchen thinking about how easily it had all unfolded. She had come exactly as I had predicted. Broken, desperate, cornered, and most importantly, without the slightest suspicion. In her eyes, I was still the poor, abandoned mother, pitiful and harmless. But this was only the prelude. Having her live with me would open the door to the next phase. I would let her settle, feel safe, believe she had found shelter. And then, when she least expected, I would teach her the difference between being poor by choice and being poor by consequence. I brewed more tea, listening to the ticking of the wall clock. Each beat of the hand felt like a countdown to an inevitable confrontation. I wondered, if James were alive, would he have chosen a gentler way? Then I remembered what he once said, love isn't only about comfort. It also sets boundaries. I pressed my lips together. I wasn't punishing my daughter. I was rebuilding the boundaries. so she would know where home was and what price comes with turning your back on it. That night, I called Jonathan. "Jonathan, I need you to do something more." "Tell me, Mrs. Matthews." "Investigate Philip's debts. I want to know exactly how much he owes, to whom, and what legal options exist to separate everything from my daughter. It will take time, but it's possible." "Perfect. And Jonathan, absolute secrecy. No one must know I'm behind this." "Of course." "May I ask what your ultimate plan is?" "My plan is simple, Jonathan. I will save my daughter but first she must understand what it means to hit rock bottom." Hanging up, I poured a glass of wine James had once saved for special occasions. It had been a long time since a day had felt like a truly special occasion. The game had begun, and for the first time in many months, I was holding all the best cards. Victoria moved into my house the very next day. She arrived with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box, everything that remained of her former life. I stood in the doorway watching my daughter arrange her things in the old room, the very room she had slept in throughout her teenage years, and I could see humiliation thread through her every movement. Someone who had just left a luxury apartment in Georgetown was now back in her childhood bedroom. "Mom, I found this in the apartment," she said, handing me a manila envelope. It was among Philip's things. "Your name is on it." Another envelope from James. My heart suddenly quickened, but I kept my voice even. "My name?" "Yes, look." There was James's handwriting, but this envelope was smaller and newer than the one I had opened before. Maybe Philip found it among Dad's things after he passed and forgot to give it to you, Victoria guessed. "Possibly." "Should we open it?" I opened the envelope right in front of her. Inside was a short letter and a small key. The letter read, "Dorothy, if you are reading this after receiving the main envelope, it means our daughter is going through a hard time." This key opens the safe deposit box at the downtown bank branch, number 247. There is something there that may help you help her, but use it wisely. "With eternal love," James Victoria read over my shoulder. "A safe deposit box?" Dad had a safe deposit box. I didn't know either. "Do you think we should go see it?" "I'm not sure, sweetheart." "Maybe we should leave it be. But what if there's something important in there? Documents or something valuable that could help us?" Desperation rang clearly in her voice. Victoria was clinging to any glimmer of hope, and I would let her cling a little longer before showing her the full picture. "All right," I said after a deliberately measured pause. "We'll go tomorrow." That evening, we ate dinner together for the first time in months. She cooked, trying to be useful, but the meal tasted strongly of guilt and despair. She told me more details about Europe, each story worse than the last. "Philip lied about everything, Mom. Not just the business, but the debts. I thought he only owed a little, but it's more than $100,000. Worst of all, he used my name to borrow, and I had no idea." "How could that be?" "He forged my signature." When we got married, I gave him some papers to set up the joint account at the bank. I never imagined he'd use them for this. "Do you have any way to prove you didn't know?" I'm not sure. The bank says because we're married, I'm still responsible. It's all too complicated. What about a divorce? I don't even know where Philip is. His phone is off, emails unanswered. It's like he vanished perfect. He had fled like a rat, leaving Victoria to face the consequences alone. In a strange way, he had done me a favor, letting my daughter taste the betrayal of someone she trusted, just as I had. The next morning, we went to the bank. Victoria was anxious but hopeful. I kept up the role of the confused widow who wasn't well versed in finances. A bank clerk led us down to the safe deposit area, verified our identities, and opened box 247. Inside were pieces of jewelry, a great many of them. Rings, necklaces, bracelets, earrings. I recognized a few as James's family heirlooms. Others were entirely unfamiliar. There was also a note listing the provenance of each item and an estimated value. Victoria drew a sharp breath. "Mom, this must be a fortune." "You think so? Look at this emerald and this pearl strand. Dad stashed away a treasure." According to the note, the total value was about $200,000. Significant, but not much compared to the rest of the assets. Like finding loose change under the sofa when there are millions in the bank. "What should we do with them, Mom?" "I don't know. These are family mementos, but we could sell part of it. With this money, you could get the beach house back, and I could pay down some of Philip's debts." There it was again. The reflex. Even when touching a legacy, her first thought was still to rescue the mess Philip had made. She hadn't finished the lesson. "Are you sure you want to use your father's legacy to pay Philip's debts?" "What other choice do I have? If I don't pay soon, the banks will seize everything. Legally, I own nothing. Everything is in Philip's name." We brought the jewelry home. Victoria laid it all out on the kitchen table, carefully examining each piece, calculating which to sell and which to keep. It broke my heart to watch her compress decades of family history into lines on a spreadsheet. "I think we can sell for around $180,000, she said one afternoon, counting figures right on the table. "Less than I hoped, but enough to cover the most urgent debts." "Are you sure?" "I have no choice. If I don't pay, they'll repossess. They could even drag this house into it if they can prove I have legal ties." The irony. Victoria now feared losing the very house I owned, planning to use money from James's jewelry, the man who had built a fortune large enough to save her, to pay the debts of the man who abandoned her. That evening, as she spread the debts across the table, Jonathan called. "Mrs. Matthews, I have a full report on Philip's debts." "It's worse than I thought." "How bad?" "Over $200,000 borrowed from multiple banks and private lenders. More importantly, he used forged documents with your daughter's signature for several loans. Legally, Victoria is bound." "How complicated." "If we can prove Victoria had no knowledge, we can get her released from some of the obligations. But it will be lengthy and costly." "How costly?" "For a good attorney on this type of case, around $50,000 with no guaranteed outcome." "I understand." "And if we paid them outright?" "That would be the fastest, if the funds are available." "But I fear she can't access that kind of money." "Jonathan, prepare all filings to free my daughter from these debts. But don't tell her you'll cover the costs, Mrs. Matthews." "I will do whatever is necessary to protect my daughter, but in a very specific way." After hanging up, I saw Victoria sitting silently before the spread of jewelry, looking like a child who had broken a beloved toy and didn't know how to fix it. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "About Dad. About how disappointed he'd be to see what I've done with my life." "Your father loved you very much. He would understand." "No, Mom. Dad taught me responsibility, to cherish family, not to be selfish. And I did the opposite. I left you for a liar. I sold family memories for cash. I destroyed everything Dad built." For the first time since she returned, there was true remorse in her voice. Not just lamenting consequences, but admitting moral fault. "Everyone makes mistakes, sweetheart. What matters is what you learn." "But how do I learn? How do I fix it?" This was exactly what I had waited for. She was ready to face the truth of her actions and their consequences. But it was not yet time to play the final card. First, I needed her to hit rock bottom completely. The days that followed were pivotal. Victoria decided to sell most of the jewelry, keeping only the engagement ring James had given me and a small necklace from her grandmother. I watched her go from shop to shop, asking for quotes, bargaining. Each sale was a snip cutting into the fabric of family memory, but necessary so she would grasp the true weight of choice. One morning she said, "Mom, I found a job." What job? Night shift office cleaning. The pay isn't high, but it's better than nothing. Seeing my child, who had lived comfortably for more than 40 years, prepare to work the night shift made my heart tighten, but also swell with pride. She had begun to face reality without waiting for someone to rescue her. In the first week, Victoria came home with swollen feet and a tired face. But something had changed. A new dignity. "How is it, sweetheart?" "Hard, but not as bad as I imagined. There's Mrs. Johnson, she's 60, has done this for 20 years. She's teaching me a lot." "What did she say?" "She said there are two kinds of people here. Those who never had a chance and those who destroyed the chances they had." She asked which kind I was. "What did you answer?" I told the truth. I once had every chance. A loving family, a stable home, a legacy. And I ruined it all by following a worthless man. "What did she say?" She smiled. "At least you know why you're here." That's more than many people can say. That night, after Victoria fell soundly asleep from her first shift, I sat in the kitchen and called Jonathan. "Any news on Philip?" "Yes, we've located him in Paris. He's been arrested for a sham marriage to the young woman your daughter mentioned. Most importantly, we found evidence of forged documents involving Victoria, with intent to flee legal implications. With this evidence, we can prove fraud and duress. Victoria will not have to pay the debts Philip incurred on his own perfect, a lawful path to save Victoria. One she would never suspect I had the resources to arrange. Begin the process immediately, Jonathan. Don't tell the girl anything. I want everything finished before we speak. I don't want false hope." "Understood. About 3 weeks to a month." "Perfect." I hung up, looked up at the ceiling, and smiled. The pieces were aligning. Victoria had learned the value of honest work, rekindled her resilience, and most importantly, begun to examine her own fault. It was time to prepare for the finale, to reveal the truth, and show Victoria she had never been abandoned. 3 weeks later, Jonathan called me with good news. "Mrs. Matthews, we've completed all the legal procedures. I can wipe out all of your daughter's debts. The evidence of Philip's fraud is very clear." "Excellent, Jonathan. It's time. Are you sure you're ready for this conversation?" "I've been ready for a long time." I set a meeting for Friday morning at Jonathan's office. To Victoria, I only said that there was a lawyer who could help resolve the legal issues, without further explanation. "Mom, I don't have the money to hire a lawyer. I can barely cover basic expenses." "Don't worry about that right now, sweetheart. Let's just go hear what he has to say. We arrived on time." Victoria wore her nicest outfit, now slightly loose on her thinner frame. She sat with her hands clenched, bracing herself for yet another piece of bad news in what felt like an endless list. "Mrs. Matthews, Ms. Victoria, thank you for coming." Jonathan greeted us with his familiar professional smile. "Thank you for your time," Victoria replied. "But I should say up front, my finances are a mess, and I'm afraid I can't afford legal fees." "That's exactly what we're going to discuss," Jonathan said, then glanced at me. "First, please review these documents." He handed Victoria a thick file. She opened it and read, her expression shifting from confusion to surprise, and finally to astonishment. "I don't understand. It says here, Philip forged my signature. There's evidence of fraud. And I'm not liable for the debts?" "That's correct," Jonathan nodded. "We've investigated over the past few weeks and have sufficient evidence to establish that you were a victim of identity fraud. But how could this be? Who paid for this investigation?" I don't have any money." Jonathan looked at me. It was my turn. "Victoria, there's something I need to tell you." "What is it, Mom?" I took a deep breath. After all these weeks of playing a role, it was time to open everything. "Your father left me more than you know. Much more. What do you mean?" "Jonathan, show her the other file." Jonathan took out another file and handed it to Victoria. This time it contained property deeds, bank statements, investment certificates, the entire fortune James had quietly built. Victoria read in silence. Across her face, emotions flickered: confusion, disbelief, shock, and finally, understanding. "Mom, it says here you're the owner of the building where I used to live." "That's right. And you have other properties, bank accounts, investments." "That's right. So that means when I sold the beach house, it was your house. And that sale was fraudulent. I've already gotten it back." Victoria stared at the documents, trying to piece everything together. "How long have you known about this?" "Since the day you called me at the clinic. You knew everything when I came back from Europe begging for help?" "That's right. You knew you could fix it all when you saw me crying every night?" "That's right." A long silence stretched, taut as a string. Victoria closed the file and looked me straight in the eyes. "Why, Mom? Why did you let me suffer when you could help?" This was the question I had awaited for weeks, because you needed to learn something that you couldn't learn any other way. Learn what? To learn the value of what you had lost: family, respect, responsibility. When you abandoned me, you didn't just take money, you took dignity, love, and trust. Victoria burst into tears, but no longer the tears of self-pity. They were the tears of understanding. "I abandoned you when you needed me most." "That's right. I treated you like trash." "That's right. And you still saved me." "Yes, but not in the way you expected. I didn't hand you money so you could keep repeating your mistakes. I let you hit rock bottom, so you yourself would learn how to climb back up." Jonathan interjected gently. "Ms. Victoria, your mother has covered all legal costs to release you from the debts caused by Philip. The assets that were illegally sold have been recovered. Legally, you are completely out of trouble. As for the cleaning job you're doing," I added, "you can quit if you want." "Why?" "Because that job is teaching you what you never learned when everything was easy: the value of effort, the dignity of honest work, and the importance of every dollar you earn yourself." Victoria wiped her tears and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in a long time. Not the pleading look of a child, but the respect of one woman for another. "Do you forgive me?" "I forgave you long ago, sweetheart. The question is, do you forgive yourself?" I don't know. I've done things that can't be forgiven. Everyone makes mistakes, Victoria. What matters is what we do after we recognize them. Jonathan gave us a few minutes of privacy. We sat in silence, letting what had just happened settle. "I want you to know this," Victoria said softly. "Even if you didn't have all this money, even if you truly were the poor widow I thought you were, I would still have learned the same lesson." "What lesson?" "That nothing is more precious than having someone who loves you unconditionally." These past weeks, the only thing that kept me sane was knowing I had a home with you, that no matter how much I had wrecked my life, you were still my mother. That never changes, Victoria. I know. But I also understand. I can't take that love for granted anymore. I have to earn it every day, with respect, gratitude, and actions, not just words. We left Jonathan's office with a different relationship. No longer just mother and daughter by blood and habit, we were two women who had chosen each other after the harshest test. Even now that she knew I had the means to fix everything, Victoria decided to keep her night shift cleaning job. "Mom, I need to finish what I started," she said as she got ready for work. "I can't return to a comfortable life as if nothing ever happened." "Are you sure? You don't have to keep punishing yourself." "This isn't punishment. It's how I remember who I used to be and who I want to become." I watched her put on a uniform, something unimaginable a few months earlier when she lived in a luxury apartment with Philip. But there was something different in her posture, in the way she closed the door, a straightness from within. She was no longer the shattered woman who collapsed on my doorstep. She was someone who had just reclaimed her dignity through honest work. That night before bed, I passed by our wedding photo. James smiled in the old picture, his eyes unexpectedly serene. I suddenly recalled what he once said. Love isn't about shielding your child from rain forever. Love is teaching them to find an awning, to rebuild a roof. I lightly touched the frame. We did it, James. That night, for the first time since James died, I slept deeply. My plan had run its course. Victoria had not only learned what she needed to learn, she had risen from the fall stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. James would be very proud. Justice had come, not as revenge, but as education, not as punishment, but as transformation. And at last, we gained something more valuable than money, a truthful relationship, built on a solid foundation that no crisis in the future could destroy. 6 months later, our lives found a new balance, something neither of us could have imagined before. Victoria completed her social work program with excellent marks, and I decided to use part of our resources to establish a fund supporting women who had suffered domestic abuse and financial abandonment. Mom, the letter from the university just came. Victoria walked into the kitchen this morning, holding an envelope. I've been accepted into the master's program. I'll start next semester. She hesitated, then added, but I want to pay the tuition myself, using the money I've saved from my city job. The salary wasn't much, but she had learned to live simply and value every dollar she earned with her own hands. Are you sure? We can easily cover this program. I know. But I need to do this myself. That's who I am now. That afternoon, Helen stopped by as she had every Friday for the past few months. She had become a confidant for both of us, watching our transformation with eyes that were both curious and warm. Dorothy, I have to confess, Helen said as she poured a second cup of tea. At first, I thought you were far too harsh with Victoria. And now, what do you think? Now I think you're the wisest mother I've ever known. Just look at your daughter. Really look at her, it was true. Victoria was sitting in the living room, studying for her exams, nothing like the woman who had left for Europe months before. My daughter now radiated a calm that came from within, a confidence rooted in her own achievements, no longer clinging to material wealth. You know, Helen went on, yesterday I saw her at the grocery store. She was buying vegetables for a family she's helping through her work. I hadn't heard her mention this. When I asked why she didn't use the state budget, she said, "There are things you can't measure in official budgets." That night, the two of us had dinner on the porch again, a small ritual that had become a habit. We told each other about our day, made plans for tomorrow, and simply enjoyed being together. "Mom, I got a strange letter today," she said as she cut the salad. "From Philip." My muscles tensed involuntarily. Philip? Where did he write from? From prison in France. Apparently, he was sentenced to 2 years for marriage fraud. In the letter, he said he regretted everything and wanted to apologize to me. How do you feel about that? To be honest, I don't feel anything. No anger, no sadness, no desire for revenge. It feels like that part of my life happened decades ago, not just a few months. Do you plan to reply? No. Not because I hate him, but because there's nothing left to say. The old Victoria, the one who married him, no longer exists. And the Victoria I am now has nothing to say to him. I listened to the maturity in her voice. The woman sitting across from me had discovered inner strength, the kind that only appears when someone hits rock bottom and learns to stand again. "Do you know what this experience has taught me?" she asked. "What?" "That true love doesn't tell you what you want to hear. It teaches you what you need to learn, even when it hurts. Philip told me what I wanted to hear, made me feel special, convinced me I deserve luxury without effort, but you taught me that true wealth comes from hard work, respect, and authentic relationships. That night, when Victoria went to her room to study, I sat alone on the porch, looking up at the stars and thinking of James. I had promised to take care of our daughter, and for the first time, I felt I was fulfilling that promise the right way. Not by caring with money, but by fostering her ability to care for herself. Not by solving her problems, but by letting her learn to solve them on her own. The next day was Sunday. We had planned to visit the beach house for the first time since I reclaimed it. "Ready?" I asked as we got into the truck. "I think I am." The drive was quiet but peaceful. When we arrived, Victoria sat in the car for a while, gazing at the house where we had spent so many summers. "It still looks the same," she whispered. "Some things don't change." I smiled, "but others must." I'm no longer the person who sold this house. We stepped inside. The house was still clean and tidy, just as James and I had kept it for years. Victoria walked through each room, touching the furniture, gazing at the photographs on the walls. "Mom, I want to apologize. Again, not just for selling the house, but for reducing our family's memories to a transaction. I've already forgiven you. This house holds 40 years of summers, birthdays, Christmases. Dad built the porch with his own hands. You planted the garden. I learned to swim at the beach in front." She sat down on the sofa where James used to read on Sunday mornings. "What hurts the most is that when I sold it, I felt nothing, just another piece of real estate. But now, standing here, I feel Dad everywhere. His laughter, the smell of morning coffee, his reading glasses left on the table. Dad is still here, Victoria. He always will be, I know. And he also know he's proud of how you handled everything. We stayed the whole day cooking, cleaning, fixing small things, as a kind of ritual to reconnect not just with the house, but with the values it stood for. When the sun touched the water's edge, we sat on the porch James had built, looking out at the bay. "Mom, I have a proposal. Tell me. Let's turn this house into a shelter for women escaping abuse, a place to stay while they rebuild their lives." It was the perfect proposal. James would have loved the idea of our beach house becoming a refuge for other families. "Wonderful, my daughter. We'll use part of the fund to run it, and I'll oversee the program through my work. Are you sure you want to turn our family home into something public? The best shelters are those that are shared. Dad used to say, a house only truly becomes a home when it opens its doors to those who need love." He was right. James had always kept our home open-hearted, welcoming relatives, friends, and neighbors who needed a temporary place. That night, we returned home with a new project and a new relationship, no longer mother and daughter bound only by duty or need. We were two women who consciously chose to build a life together, grounded in love, respect, and purpose. Before bed, I spoke silently to James once more. "We did it, my love. Our daughter finally understands what matters, and for the first time since he passed, I felt him answer, 'I always knew you could.' Both of you are stronger than you think. Justice had come, not as revenge, but as education, not as punishment, but as transformation. And in the end, we gained something more valuable than money, a genuine relationship built on a foundation no crisis could ever destroy." Late that night, after washing the dishes, I stood by the doorway feeling the breeze on the porch. In my mind was a checklist of tasks: legal procedures for the shelter, the counseling team, emergency intake process, reserve funds. Then I stopped. It wasn't about systems, it was about people. I closed my eyes and pictured the faces that would walk through that door, tired, fearful, but still carrying a spark of hope. I knew I had to turn the beach house into a promise. Here, no one will ever be abandoned again. A year later, when we opened the doors to the first family, a young mother and her 2 children who had just escaped abuse, I stood on the porch, gazing at the sea, and heard James's voice echo in my heart. You did it, Dorothy. Now both you and our daughter are free, and for the first time since he was gone, I truly believed it. The story of Dorothy and Victoria is proof of a simple truth that is often forgotten. The greatest love does not always lie in giving everything away, but in allowing someone to learn how to stand on their own. Dorothy could have rescued her daughter from the very beginning. She had the money, the power, and every means to erase Victoria's troubles in a single day. But she chose not to, not because she was cruel, but because she understood that some lessons can only be carved deeply through pain and loss. Victoria had to lose everything, her money, her marriage, her social status, before finally realizing what truly matters. Dignity born from her own effort, strength gained from overcoming hardship, and the kind of love that never leaves you, even when you've lost everything else. James, the late husband, left Dorothy not only a fortune, but also a greater lesson. Money can feed the body, but only trials can nourish the soul. Today, the beach house in Chesapeake Bay is no longer a luxurious retreat for a well-off family. It has become a lighthouse for women, groping their way through darkness, a testament that purpose can rise from suffering, and understanding can grow from loss. Perhaps this is the greatest legacy Dorothy and James have left behind. Not real estate, not bank accounts, but the awareness that sometimes the deepest form of love is letting someone fall so that they can learn how to rise again. For when they do rise on their own 2 feet, they will be stronger than anyone could have imagined. This is the story of Dorothy Matthews, a 73-year-old woman who taught her daughter the most important lesson, that you are never truly poor as long as you still have love, dignity, and the strength to keep walking forward. Sometimes, the cruelest thing you can do is to give too easily, but the kindest is to let someone earn it themselves. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, please share it so more people can find strength in this lesson. Do you agree with Dorothy's way of teaching her daughter, or do you think she was too harsh? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Tales so you won't miss more heartfelt stories and profound lessons. See you in the next video.